Gun companies will say they've made a little gun that shoots like a big gun all the time. How many times have you heard a gun company say that when marketing their new whiz-bang pistol? And Staccato made the C4X, basically slapping a monolithic compensator on their C3.6, and with that compensator comes a massive price tag. Remember when the HDP 4.5 came out and it was about $200 more than the HDP 4? It had a sight block and it was only $200 more. Well, the C3.6 starts at about $2,300, so surely with that compensator, you'd think that it may be, $200 to $500 more, and that'd be a fair price. Wrong. This sucker starts at $34.99. It is wildly expensive. So is the gun awesome? Does it truly shoot like a big gun? So we're going to compare it to the C3.6, see how it shoots relative to that, the P45, which is the bigger gun, and the Glock 19 Ramjet, just to see how this is going to compete sort of head to head, because basically this on paper has the same specs as the Ramjet. Welcome back, my dudes. Today we're talking about the Staccato C4X, which despite that intro, I'm telling you, it's an awesome gun. It's very similar to the C3.6, so I'm not gonna like dive deep and do like a review where it's like, this is the reliability and this is like the grip texture. That's all basically done on the C3X video. This video is gonna focus on purely the performance difference between this gun and the guns we talked about. If this is not your first video of mine you're watching, please consider subscribing. And if it is your first video you're watching, welcome, and hit the subscribe button if you wouldn't mind. So just a little bit about the C4X. It's built off the C3.6. I mean, if you hold them next to each other, they're basically the same. The dust cover's a little bit longer to accept the compensator, and that's about it. Everything else is functionally the same thing. The fit is basically the same on the guns. This one doesn't feel any tighter than this one. It's just the compensator and the slightly longer dust cover is really what we're talking about in the difference. And the C3.6, in my video on that, if you didn't watch it, it's a special gun. I don't shoot it any better than less costly alternatives, but I prefer it to them because it just feels special. Quickly going to the indoor gun club, getting the gun zeroed and bench resting it, I found that the accuracy using Buffalo Creek 115s, and Buffalo Creek is a supporter of the channel. They're very generous and I thank them very much. I found the groups to be actually brilliant. They shoot the groups really, really well. And that Buffalo Creek 115 is just a range load using round nose projectiles. It's not using hollow points. So you can expect even better accuracy out of something loaded with hollow points. Well, let's get to the head-to-head performance with the C4X and the other guns in question. First, looking purely at the slow motion video, if you look at the C4X next to the C3.6, you'll notice that the C4X is notably smoother in recoil, meaning that the gun just isn't as turbulent. It doesn't lift as high. It doesn't dip as low. It's easier to hold steady on target. When you swap it over to the P4.5, what you'll notice immediately is the P4.5 is notably softer shooting, and that's because the slide moves slower, and you can see it in the slow motion video. That and the P4.5 weighs 10 ounces more, so it's just easier to shoot rapidly than the C4X. The C4X does feel faster, but the P45 feels even more controllable. When you swap over to the Glock, you'll see that due to the very long trigger pull, immediately you'll see that I'm not running the trigger as quick, and the Glock looks a lot more turbulent. But when you're behind the gun, I promise you that you don't really observe it to be a lot different. Because of the lower bore axis of the Glock pistol, I think that it actually might climb less. We'll let the angles speak in slow motion on that. But it's not a lot different from the C4X, honestly. So then I lined up at the 7-yard line and shot basically a modified build drill with just 5 shots and found out that the guns all perform roughly the same in my hands at that distance, because realistically 7 yards is not where you're going to begin to notice the benefit of a compensator like on the C4X. Back at 25-yard lines, where some people are going to say that's not a practical handgun distance, I would argue that yes, it absolutely is. And the point here is going to see if the weight matters as far as how the gun's going to return to zero. So I can already tell some of you guys are like, well, he's not fluent on Glocks, so Glocks are getting hamstrung. And realistically, I'm not fluent on any of these guns. I don't shoot any of them enough yet to understand how the gun is going to be moving. If you were to test the guns yourself, you'd probably have the same conclusion. If you spend enough time on any of the guns, you'd be able to shrink the groups that they're capable of producing. That's not what we're testing so much, is just like as a baseline, how did the guns move? So we're testing 25 yards, which some people are gonna argue, that doesn't count. That's not real self-defense, that's rifle distance or whatever. I would argue it's not. I would argue that you should be able to shoot at 25 yards practically. But let's see what they do at 25 yards. P45. P45 is a 259, C36. It's a 304. C4X. That was honestly a lot easier. That's a 276 Glock. That's a 286. That is the P45. That is the 3.6. That's the 4X. And that is the Glock. And at 25 yards, I did notice that the compensated guns are easier to control for single target engagements than even the P45. And then I set up a sample stage with some hat cam footage. Yeah, that's why in all the shooting footage you've seen so far, I forgot to take it off my hat, and so whatever. So on the sample stage, the front row targets are about 15 yards away from the shooting position, and the back row targets are about 20 yards away. Any difference between the guns is going to show up at kind of that 15-yard point in my hands. We'll start with just the numbers, because the numbers don't really tell the tale. The P45 went first, and it gets a redemption run at the end, because on any sample stage that you set up, as you kind of get warmed up, get used to how you can transition the gun, you're learning from round to round, so you get to push a little bit harder. Whichever gun goes first is going to be disadvantaged, so the P45 goes last as well. But with the initial run, you see that the P45 is roughly the same as the little carry guns, with the C36 being notably slower simply because it just takes longer to recover. And nowhere is that more evident than when I put the hat cam footage on top of each other. So while the C4X is basically the same gun as the C3.6, the C4X for those single target engagements just recovers significantly faster. And you even get the benefit of that in transition because the gun's just recovering quicker. So when you get to the next target, the gun's ready to go. The C4X and the Glock, despite the Glock's longer trigger, which I'm not used to because, you know, you're shooting 3 Staccato P series guns, the Glock trigger just feels a lot different, so it was an adjustment getting going, but the Glock shot basically the same pace as the C4X. But then the P45 got its redemption run, and this happened. You can see that the time is still quicker when I'm fully warmed up. With the big gun relative to the little one, we were at about 12 versus somewhere around 11.5 with the big boy. So, does it shoot more like a big gun? Yes. Does it shoot like a big gun? No. So the P45 being about 10 ounces heavier than the C4X is just a lot easier to shoot. You saw it in the slow motion, and you absolutely can see it when you put the footage next to each other. The P45 is just way easier to do performance shooting with because it's got a longer grip, it weighs more, and the sight block barrel thing does make the recoil almost like having a compensator. And if you consider that this gun costs about $900 less than this gun, it kind of makes you scratch your head. Because what we've learned is that the smaller guns are never going to be able to shoot like the bigger guns that do roughly the same thing. The big gun is clearly going to be the choice in an outside the waistband sort of application. The C4X is a very capable gun, but it's more of like a concealed carry sort of approach, despite all the marketing being for the kind of invincible ninjas that Staccato makes its guns for. Let's be really honest, I bet there's more civilians who are buying these guns than the SWAT teams around the country. And if you consider the cost for performance, the differential between the Ramjet 19 and the C4X, you can almost buy an entire P45 for what the cost differential is between the Ramjet 19 and the C4X. So yeah, it's a $3,500 gun because the values on 2011s aren't really making any sense. They're not a rational good to be buying. They're luxury goods. They're kind of like FlexPro watches and stuff like that. And as you've seen, the performance can't really be justified for the extra price tag. But yet and still, I moved my C36 out of my carry gun safe into my regular storage safe simply because the C4X is awesome. I really, really like it as a gun. It just doesn't make sense for a lot of people. Like, it's going to be somebody who has a fully funded 401k and is, you know, very comfortable, who's going to go out and get one of these because they want it. And it's, you know, that's fine. It is a special gun. It absolutely is a special gun. It's also an expensive gun. But if you want more information on the rest of the stuff on the C4X, you can check out my C36 video here. I kind of run through everything about the gun there, and it's applicable on the C4X as well. As always, I appreciate you guys, and I will catch you on the next one.